2022 has been an interesting year for jiu-jitsu and submission grappling in general. We had Jay Rodriguez win his division in the Abu Dhabi Combat Club Trials as a blue belt. And it begs the question, do belts matter in jiu-jitsu anymore? Guys, my name is Bill Jones. I'm the head instructor of top-level martial arts in beautiful downtown Cuyahoga Falls. I'm a black belt under Master Pedro Sauer and Tony Rinaldi. You're watching Professor's Corner. Do the like and subscribe thing. I'd really appreciate it, but let's just listen for now. So look, the question comes up every few years, and it's similar in nature to the question of gi versus no gi, and I can explain that another time. But do belts matter in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? Well, I think to answer that question and to come up with a satisfactory answer for most people, we need to first look at what belts even are. Some of you who are watching this have a long history in martial arts and maybe know the history of belts. Others probably not. So Jigoro Kano, who is the person who created judo, he was a very smart man, and when he created judo, he created a Menkyo system, which is how Japanese martial arts in general worked at the time. And basically what that is an instructor certification of some sort. And there were different levels based on, depending on what you were doing, what kind of martial art it was, all that kind of stuff. But for the most part, you were either a student or an instructor. And he created a belt that would denote that. You had white and you had black. And the whole that actually came from and again, this is kind of, I've never dealt with it personally, so if you're from the Japanese culture and you know exactly what I'm talking about, my understanding is it was based on swimming, and somehow the teams in swimming and stuff would have like black and white there to denote who was where and stuff. So kind of the way like football teams and stuff have their own colors and stuff, and when you watch the games on CBS, you'll see like kind of like the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to be in a yellow color while the Browns are going to be in an orange color, right? Like that's kind of what that was. And he said, well, let's make these colors, and if you're an instructor, you wear a black belt, and if you're not an instructor, you wear a white belt. And it was that simple. That's the whole purpose of what it was at the time. So the question then becomes, where the rest of these belts come from? And the answer to that is actually pretty simple too. As these instructors went out into the world, and the other thing to consider is that a lot of people then, and this is going to circle back to today, but a lot of people then, like, you didn't just do judo like as a hobby, right? You didn't just go there and do it like once a week or twice a week, after your work day. Like when you did judo, that's what you were doing was judo. Like you did it a lot. So my point in that is it didn't take very, very long to get to the point where you could teach other people. So it wasn't like it was a 10-year path to black belt. If you go to most other countries and you're spending time training, for example, in Korea, it only takes about a year to 2 years to get a black belt in Taekwondo if you're training on a regular basis in Korea. And that's not taking away from their abilities. If you watch some of these people, they're phenomenal athletes. They can do some amazing stuff. All it really meant was you knew the basics well enough to show other people the basics. So that's kind of what it meant at the time. And what it means today is maybe, I think, a little different than that. I think based on, any number of things. So going back, what happened when they started going to Europe and they started getting more part-time people into martial arts, judo specifically, or kids even started taking it there, and these weren't people who could necessarily teach other people. And they realized they needed something to help keep people interested. And that's what the belts initially were. It said, hey, this kid who's doing it, he obviously isn't going to be able to teach anybody anytime soon. We don't want him to quit because like he needs, it's good for him. He needs progression though. He needs something to say, you are getting better. Here is how because like you have grades in school, there's progression in everything we do. There's hierarchy in everything we do, for better or for worse. And they decided that, well, if I add some more belts, and again, you can look up the names of these people, but basically what they did was they added more belts, and that has proliferated throughout the world. It became very popular. So before we can get on to the question of are belts necessary in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the question is, why are they even popular? Why did that become so popular? And I think it's because a lot of people need guidance in their life. A lot of people want guidance in their life. And when they go to do something, they want to be able to see progression. And it's really hard sometimes to see progression in martial arts, because if you and John start at the same time and you're always grappling and sparring John, you're growing at roughly the same rate. So it might be like, man, yeah, I got you with this technique and you got me with that technique. And then the next day, oh man, you got me with those two. And then the next day you're like, I'm going to figure out how to get past those two. And you get him with something. But like, you don't necessarily see that progression the way you do, say, on a musical instrument, where you were able to not play Mary Had a Little Lamb, and tomorrow you can definitely play Little Mary Had a Little Lamb, and a week from now you can play the beginnings of Bach, and then, you know, like, it just kind of becomes quite obvious. Whereas in martial arts, the progression isn't quite as obvious. Moreover, if there's multiple instructors, so let's say day one has Sam as an instructor, and day two has Debbie as an instructor, and day three has Jojo as an instructor. When Sam comes in, he might say, okay, everybody here needs to work on their basic stand and base. That's it. That's what we're working, is stand and base and some of the things that can happen. And Debbie comes in and she's like, oh, okay, well, everybody here should be able to do flying arm bars. Well, that may not be true, right? Like, so having a rank system should, like, I can immediately walk into a room and, for the most part, look at an audience and say, okay, I see I have 30 white belts, 4 blue belts, and 1 purple belt. It's probably going to be a smarter seminar for me to teach, to keep things at a relatively basic level, or a fundamental level, based on who I'm working with, because they're not going to have the body awareness to do maybe some of the things that I would like, or that would be, I don't want to say advanced, because I don't think there's truly advanced techniques, but I think if I was going to teach a room full of white belts, it might be worth it to me to show them, you know, whatever sweep and into whatever submission, but spend a lot of time on just the breaking mechanics of that submission, right? Like, it doesn't do anybody good to learn 100 ways to get to an armbar if they can't actually finish the armbar. So I think that's maybe what I mean there as far as fundamentals, because I think what is fundamental can change to some degree from school to school. And it's going to be based on, well, what are you experienced with, and what are you seeing on the mat on a regular basis, right? Like, so I think that there are some schools that would say, oh yeah, Berimbolo is a fundamental movement. It's a movement from to the back, and it's like, okay, I get what you're saying. I think it's complex, and if I'm going to teach to an audience, I'm going to teach to an audience based on their overall level of movement. Now, with all that said, it is highly likely, and I mean, I've met people like this. I'm sure if you're watching, you've met people like this. You walk into a room and you say, okay, oh, there's a blue belt. And then that blue belt is just wrecking everybody. And this happened at Abu Dhabi. I mean, this guy, Jay Rodriguez, went in and just submitted, I think, 6 out of 8 opponents. And these are people who've been training a very long time, and this guy's a blue belt. Right, so like, and it's no-gi. It's a no-gi tournament, so no one knows he's necessarily a blue belt if they didn't know who he was. But should that be happening? Should a blue belt be able to submit a black belt, let alone do it 6 out of 8 times? Because chances are good, and I don't have a list of everybody, but chances are good, at least a few of the people he was rolling were black belts or high brown belts. So should that guy have a blue belt? And if not, like, when do you decide to take someone who's maybe doing really good to a higher level? When do you say, oh, you know what, you've only been training 3 years, but you're a black belt? Like, when do you decide that? So that leads to a lot of people, especially people who mainly train only no-gi, saying there's no purpose behind the belts. Belts are stupid. Okay, and to that I would say no, I don't think they are. And but I do think that you can accidentally hold people back with belts. So I'll explain. I think the belts have a great purpose and culturally have developed purpose, whether you like it or not. So the purpose of a belt is essentially a certification system, right? When you see a black belt in any martial art, you know that that person can probably teach you the fundamentals of that martial art. And that's what that should mean to anybody. I don't care if you're walking into a Taekwondo school, a karate school, a Brazilian Jiu-jitsu school. That's what that black belt usually means, is that person has a good handle on the fundamental movements, and they can teach you the fundamentals of that art. They can probably communicate it. That doesn't mean they're a good teacher. Those are two different things, and maybe we can talk about that in the future. But they know it well enough to show like a brand new person what's going on. Whereas in no-gi schools, and I shouldn't say no-gi, but schools that don't have some sort of progression for their students, I think you're doing your students a disservice, because if that student has any desire to go open up another school, they're going to have to do weird explaining that they shouldn't have to do. It's that simple. You know, like when mom walks in with her 8-year-old that she wants to learn karate, and she's like, oh, well, how do you know who's good at this and who's not and who has the belts? And you have to sit there explaining, well, yeah, some martial arts use belts, but we don't because of this and that. Why should you even have to have that explanation? You could be like, yeah, all the instructors are black belts. You could just say it. Simple. That's all people need to know. Or in the case of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, like, yeah, you know, we can see the rank system. You know, they have a rank system. They're wearing a belt. All of our instructors are certified to teach. You know, that's all they need to know. You know, and if they want to get on the mat and test an instructor, they're welcome to do that. And that's part of the jiu-jitsu mentality, though, right? Like if someone really wants to roll you and find out if it works, come on in. So, but it's real easy to look at competitions and say, man, some of these purple belts and some of these brown belts and some of these blue belts are doing amazing things. Why aren't they black belts? And that comes down, and always has, in every martial art, in every school, it comes down to what are the standards of the school and the association they're under. So, for example, my school is a Gracie Jiu-jitsu school under Master Pedro Sauer. The standard is that everyone going to black belt must know the fundamental movements taught in the Helio Gracie master text, or it's called Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. And if they don't know that, then they can't be a Pedro Sauer black belt. Now, what does that mean? Because if you look at it, some of it is kind of hokey and weird, and it's a tradition thing, right? Like, does that mean that's what they have to focus on? No, it's just what they have to know. And it was a promise made to a dying man, and that has value. So that's part of what they have to know. Of course, they have to be able to roll. They have to be able to do all kinds of stuff. But that is the fundamental demonstration that they do to earn black belt, along with the years of training that they put in, or hours of training, I think is a better way to say it. Which brings us to another point. You know, some places say, you know, like they promote based on number of classes. And I think, at least in our case, that's a misnomer. We don't promote based on number of classes. You have to have attended a minimum number of hours to get said promotion. So that's a big difference between the two. Minimum and you get it are two different things, right? Like, I have plenty of people who have had the minimum of 100 hours of training that are required to go from white to blue, but aren't anywhere near blue belt. And that's just because, you know, they aren't picking it up as fast, or, you know, maybe those 100 hours are spread out over like a year and a half, 2 years. You know, like you know, they're only coming once a week, and they're not really catching on as fast. They have to be able to do this stuff as well. Whereas I also have people who this year alone have gotten 1,000 hours on their purple belt. So, like, you know, it's it's a completely different thing. Like, you're not guaranteed rank ever. So what does all this mean? I kind of like to glance at my notes. So we're bringing it back to, do these belts matter? I'm trying not to get off on too many tangents. Um, I think they matter to a point. They matter especially for people who are brand new to the art, who are just kind of like culturally used to the idea that a black belt is the high rank and white belt is the low rank. And most people know that no matter what the martial art is, as they walk through the door. It saves instructors and your students who go to open up schools. It saves them time having to explain that, oh no, we just care if they can kick ass or not. Because I'm going to be honest, most parents don't care about that as much as you'd think. Um, it saves weird explanations. Let's move on just a little bit and talk about jiu-jitsu as a sport. If you look at jiu-jitsu solely as a sport, you don't look at it as a martial art, as a self-defense art. And I'm not saying that guys who do it, like, let's say Gordon Ryan gets in a fight. Some dude tries to beat him up. Or actually, there's videos of it happening to Ryan Hall years ago in a pizza shop. Some dude's being belligerent to everybody in the pizza shop. And he just so gently tackles the guy to the ground and just sits on him, looks at the waitress and says, oh, I'm not going to hurt him. I'm not going to hurt him. Just kind of easily maintains him until it finally escalated later in the video where Ryan finally had to choke the guy unconscious, but like still never hurt the dude. There's another one of BJ, or was it BJ Penn? I don't think it was BJ Penn. I think it was, anyway, there's another video of someone having to do something very similar. But my point is that these people can defend themselves, right? Like, for the most part. That doesn't mean they don't know self-defense. They may not be doing the prescribed Gracie Jiu-jitsu self-defense, but they know self-defense, and they know how to use Jiu-jitsu to control a human body. I think weapons is a completely different story, because I don't think weapons training is ever done properly, or rarely is it ever done properly. So when you look at Jiu-jitsu solely as a sport, do belts matter? No, they don't. They don't at all. And what we're seeing as more and more athletes take on jiu-jitsu is they are learning fast. It is not uncommon now for at least one or two people in almost every school I go to be that person. Everybody has that guy who trains like constantly and is young, healthy, and keeps themselves in good shape, treats their body like an athlete treats their body. They train jiu-jitsu the way athletes train their sport. And you're like, who is this blue belt that can just dominate everybody who walks through the door, or gives them all a hard time no matter what? And he's not training particularly rude or hard, not in that way, just is super technical. Combined with the access that people have to high level knowledge these days. BJJ Fanatics, Jiu-Jitsu X, all of these video systems, online video training systems, have just exploded the knowledge within Jiu-Jitsu. And I think if you're an instructor in any school and you're not paying attention to it, then you are doing your students a disservice. I don't know why you wouldn't, unless you are one of those people. If you are Gordon Ryan, you are Craig Jones, you are John Danaher, you are BJ Penn. Sure, I can see why you might ignore some of it. But even then, now you're a high-level athlete, and you're probably paying attention to it anyway. So I think that to that end, no, it doesn't matter. And I think guys like Nicky Rod winning, I think the prevalence of seeing blue and purple belts in local absolute divisions, hanging in there, doing just fine, winning some, losing some, beating black belts, I think that is something that will become more normal within the sport. So what does that mean for rank? It means the same thing it has always meant, is that rank is very specific to the individual who is earning that rank. And I think that there is a difference in being an ADCC competitive black belt and a difference between being a hobbyist black belt, and I think that's okay. Because I think both of those people in the arts of submission grappling, whether it's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Sambo, whatever other submission grappling is out there, judo, 10th planet system, these are all submission grappling systems, right? catch wrestling, like being a black belt in that, whether you've done it for 10 years and you're a hobbyist and you just got your black belt, or whether you did it for 4 years and you've treated yourself like an athlete and you've got a black belt in 4 years, I don't think that makes that big a difference. Yes, I think the competitive black belt is always going to beat the non-competitive black belt, and probably at much lower rank, right? Like, I think you're going to have those athletes who, as blue and purple belts, are able to take on, hobbyist black belts and beat them, and that's okay. That also doesn't mean there's nothing for them to learn from that hobbyist black belt. If that hobbyist black belt is like a 45-year-old guy that just got his black belt, he's been training for 12 years, he's probably got some cool knowledge. And most of the athletic high-level people I meet, they don't just slough off that person. They talk to that person, even though they can tap them. Like, I have a guy in my school who can give me a hell of a time. I have a couple of them. But when I talk, they listen, and it doesn't mean, they don't think that I don't have knowledge. They can beat me, they can tap me, and that's just the nature of, like, life. They're 20 years younger than me. And maybe if I was their age, I'd be able to keep up with them a little better. I don't know, but I'm not their age, so they treat that as it is. Like, it's pretty rare that the coach of a team can actually get out on the court and play with the team, or out on the field and play with the team. That person doesn't usually exist. And jiu-jitsu is a weird mix where that's kind of the expectation sometimes, and it can't be forever. So anyway, that's a long-winded explanation for me to say that I don't think belts matter too much, except for within the school that you're in, and I think they matter greatly to the people who are earning them. And I think that athletes will see them as mattering less because, especially in submission grappling, unless you're doing it in the gi, it doesn't matter as much, right? If you're competing at ADCC, there's no division for rank there. It's like you're either able to tap someone or you're not. The last thing I'll say about this is, the propensity of instructors to put the belt on a pedestal and act like it's harder to get than what it is. The better your school gets, the faster people are going to be earning belts. And I'm not saying that the average person should be earning a black belt in 3-4 years. I don't think that's true. But I do think it's realistic that the average person who trains consistently, we're not talking about someone who took 2 years off because of having a baby or whatever, like, that stuff's going to happen. But, like, if they're consistently training, I think it's very realistic for people to go from white belt to black belt in 8 years, 7 years maybe. It's just, I don't think, I have myself and 3 other black belts teaching in the school, there's just a lot of access to a lot of great information, and I think that it's a much faster process than what it used to be. Anyway, guys, I hope this has been helpful. Do me a favor in the comments, let me know what you think, and I'll talk to you later. Have a great one.